Before refrigerators came along, keeping food from spoiling was a daily challenge. For thousands of years, people lived at the mercy of the seasons and the heat. When the summer sun beat down, milk would sour and meat would spoil if nothing was done. In cooler regions, they might lower pails of milk into a well or springhouse, letting the cold water and stone delay spoilage. A springhouse was often a small shed built over a flowing stream, where crocks of cream and butter sat in the water to keep them chilled. A root cellar under the house, dark and musty, could keep potatoes, apples and cabbage from rotting as quickly, the earthen walls holding a bit of winter's chill inside. These measures were laborious and imperfect, but they often made the difference between having food to eat or watching it spoil. In ancient days, the idea of refrigeration was a far-off dream, yet people found simple ways to make the heat more bearable. Long ago in Egypt, on hot dry nights, families placed water in shallow clay pots on their rooftops. As the stars twinkled overhead and a faint desert breeze whispered by, the water slowly released its heat to the vast night sky. By morning, the water in the pots was noticeably cooler, sometimes even forming a thin layer of ice, a small miracle in the desert. Overnight, the desert air would coax warmth from the water, occasionally leaving a delicate crust of ice by dawn. In ancient India, people used the cool night air similarly. They would set shallow clay trays of water on beds of straw at dusk, and by dawn, a thin crust of ice might form on top. They skimmed off these ice crystals as a precious luxury for the day's heat. To those who discovered it, this could feel like a small miracle, water turning solid under the stars. Other civilizations discovered the preserving power of ice and snow. The Persians, over 2,000 years ago, mastered the art of storing winter's cold. They built yakchals, large dome-shaped mud brick ice houses with deep underground chambers cooled by subterranean air. Stepping inside one of these yakchals on a blistering summer day, a person would feel the temperature plummet. The walls were incredibly thick and lined with insulating materials keeping the heat out. It was like entering a cold cave. Amazingly, the ice would last through the scorching summer. Food could be stored safely, and frozen treats like sherbets could be made for royalty. In a time before electricity, a yakchal was a marvel of engineering, a cool oasis in a sea of heat. The Chinese and other cultures also harvested winter ice. As far back as 1000 BC, the Chinese were collecting ice from lakes when the weather turned cold. They held grand ceremonies to give thanks for the ice harvest, filling ice houses with precious blocks of frozen water. In the heat of summer, that ice would be used to chill drinks for the wealthy and keep food a little longer. Ancient Greeks and Romans dug large snow pits insulated with grass, chaff or branches of trees to store ice. Like the Jews of biblical times, the Greeks and Romans did not generally use ice to preserve food, but primarily as a means to cool beverages. In Rome, snow was even brought down from the mountains to sell in the markets. Wealthy Romans would mix the snow with honey and fruit juice, creating chilled sweet concoctions, a distant ancestor of the sorbets and iced desserts we know. Such treats were rare and costly, but they showcased the lengths to which people would go for a taste of cold. For most people in those eras, true refrigeration, the ability to keep food fresh beyond the next day or two, was out of reach. Life was ruled by the sun and the seasons. If you wanted fresh meat, you slaughtered an animal and ate it quickly, or preserved what you couldn't eat by drying, salting or smoking it. Those preservation methods worked but changed the taste and texture of food, and even then you could only keep things so long. If you wanted milk, you had to drink it fast or turn it into cheese before it spoiled. Fruits and vegetables were abundant only when they were in season nearby. As winter stores ran low, diets would shrink to hardy grains, salted meats, and whatever roots or fruits had kept in the cellar. People understood how quickly food could decay in the warmth. A cool cave or a cellar was a treasure then, a place where the temperature stayed a bit lower and the spoilage slowed. Despite all these efforts, some food always spoiled sooner than hoped. It was a continual race against time and bacteria. Still, the idea of harnessing cold was captivating. For centuries, ice remained a luxury for many. In warmer regions especially, it was precious. Imagine living in a tropical climate long ago. Ice would be something you might never see unless it was brought from far away or created by some trick. In medieval and early modern times, wealthy households in Europe built ice houses on their estates. These were essentially large holes or stone-lined chambers in the ground. insulated and covered, where winter ice and snow could be stored for use in summer. It took effort and planning. Labourers had to cut and haul heavy blocks of ice from frozen lakes in the dead of winter. They would use saws and axes, then load the ice onto wagons or sleds. The blocks were packed in straw and hauled to the ice house, then carefully layered inside. Come July, the lord of the manor could enjoy chilled wine or iced desserts, astonishing guests, a chilly delight produced by last winter's labour. In many places, harvesting ice and keeping food cool involved the whole community. In American colonial times and into the 1800s, if you lived in a town with cold winters, you might see neighbours gathering on a frozen pond when the ice grew thick. They scored the surface into grids and sawed out great slabs, then heaved them from the water with long iron tongs. Working from dawn until the weak winter sun set, they hauled block after block. Each chunk might weigh several dozen kilos, and men used horses and sledges to pull the ice to shore. In town, the ice was packed into ice houses, wooden barns insulated with sawdust, where it might remain frozen for months. A well-built ice house could preserve ice through the summer, the piles of sawdust keeping the blocks cold and separate. This method proved to be difficult, dangerous, and certainly did not resemble anything that could be duplicated on a commercial scale. But it worked well enough for local needs. All these methods were natural, relying on winter's gift or the night's coolness. They were seasonal and slow. There was no easy way to make summer cold on demand, not yet. But as the centuries turned, curious minds began to wonder, could cold be created, not just saved? Could we find a way to make ice even when the sun blazed high, using more than just shade and breeze? Even into the early 20th century, in places where electricity was still a distant dream, people devised clever ways to keep food cool. Consider a lone farmhouse in the Australian outback around 1910. The afternoon sun beats down on red earth and scrub, the air shimmering with heat. On the shady porch of the house stands a tall rectangular contraption known as a coolgardie safe. It's essentially a wooden cabinet with wire mesh sides, covered by thick Hessian cloth that's kept damp with water. As hot winds blow across the wet cloth, the water evaporates and carries heat away, cooling the inside of the cabinet. Inside this simple safe, the day's milk and butter sit on shelves, along with a joint of salted meat. A tin tray on top is filled with water that slowly drips down the cloth sides, keeping them wet. Every so often you hear a drip hitting the metal catch basin at the bottom. The air around the safe is a few degrees cooler than the scorching yard, and inside it's cool enough to keep food from spoiling by evening. The young farm wife comes out to fetch some butter for supper. She lifts the curtain of damp cloth and reaches in. The air is refreshingly cool on her face. The butter is still firm, not melted into oil. She smiles, knowing that in this remote place, miles from any ice supplier, this little invention is protecting her family's food. The coolgardie safe was a humble predecessor of the modern fridge, harnessing the natural power of evaporation. Its cooling effect depended on dry air and diligent refilling of water. It couldn't make ice or chill a drink to frosty perfection, but it kept food a bit longer in a land of relentless heat. In many arid parts of Australia, these safes were common on porches, using the desert breeze to create a whisper of coolness, an ingenious adaptation to preserve the essentials of life before electric refrigeration finally arrived. It was in the 18th century that the first clues emerged. In 1748, a Scottish professor named William Cullen performed a quiet experiment at the University of Glasgow. In a lab lit by flickering oil lamps, he used a pump to create a partial vacuum over a container of ether. As the ether evaporated into the vacuum, it absorbed heat from its surroundings. Observers watched in amazement as a thin film of ice began to form, even though no winter chill was present. Cullen had demonstrated that evaporation could pull heat away and create cooling. It was a scientific marvel for its time, a party trick of physics with no immediate practical use, but it hinted at a possibility. Cold could be made, not just found. Not long after, in 1758, the American inventor Benjamin Franklin, together with a professor named John Hadley, explored the same idea in Cambridge, England. They systematically evaporated alcohol and other fluids to see how cold things could get. With a bellows to speed up evaporation, they managed to lower the temperature of a thermometer bulb well below the freezing point of water. They noted that soon after they passed 0 degrees Celsius, the point where water freezes, a thin film of ice formed on the thermometer's surface, even as the room remained warm. Franklin wrote, "From this experiment, one may see the possibility of freezing a man to death on a warm summer's day." It was a cheeky remark about the power they had harnessed, but like Cullen's demonstration, it was simply an experiment. There was no machine yet, no device to put in a kitchen or a hospital. The world would have to wait and continue relying on ice houses and cellars a while longer. The early 19th century brought new pioneers of cold. In 1805, an American inventor named Oliver Evans sketched out a design for a refrigeration machine. He imagined a closed cycle of vaporizing and condensing a fluid to create cooling, the basic principle behind what we now call the vapor compression cycle. Evans never built his machine, but his ideas laid groundwork for others. By the 1830s, technology was inching closer to reality. An American expatriate in Great Britain, Jacob Perkins, took out a patent in 1834 for a working ice-making machine. Perkins' design used ether circulating in a closed loop to absorb heat, and then dump that heat out, over and over. In essence, it was the first functioning refrigerator, though it was a far cry from the sleek kitchen appliance we know. His prototype system could operate continuously, but it was complicated and wasn't a commercial success. It was more a proof of concept. Yet it showed that the dream of mechanical refrigeration could work outside of theory. Across the ocean in the United States, a doctor in Florida was thinking about cooling in a different context. In the 1840s, Dr. John Gorrie saw patients suffering in the sweltering heat, and he believed that cooling the sick room air would help treat diseases like yellow fever. In a small room, perhaps with the shutters drawn against the southern sun, Gorrie built a machine to make ice. It was bulky and hand-cranked, dripping and wheezing as it worked. In 1848 he succeeded in creating ice artificially. With that ice, he could cool the air in his hospital, bringing relief to feverish patients. Gorrie's invention earned him a patent in 1851, and it might have been the start of a cooling revolution in the South. But the doctor struggled to find backers and funds. His machine was met with scepticism and even ridicule by those who delivered natural ice. Heartbroken and penniless, Gorrie died before he could see mechanical cooling catch on. His dream of manufactured ice was ahead of its time, but it inspired others around the world. On stifling summer nights, Gorrie would hang ice-filled metal basins from the ceiling of his hospital and let the cold air sink down toward the patients to ease their fevers. He dreamed of cooling entire buildings to prevent disease and make the tropics more livable. In a way, Dr. Gorrie envisioned air conditioning long before it became reality. Meanwhile, the world's appetite for cold was growing. During the early 1800s, especially in America, a booming new industry was taking shape, the ice trade. Instead of making ice, entrepreneurs realized money could be made by moving ice from where winters were freezing to where summers were hot. In 1806, a canny New England businessman named Frederick Tudor set out to ship ice to the Caribbean. It sounded like a fool's errand, hauling large blocks of ice in a wooden ship through the tropics to an island where it never snowed. At first, many scoffed at Tudor's idea. They imagined all that ice melting into nothing on the voyage. And indeed, his early attempts were rough, with much of the ice lost. But Tudor was determined. He built better insulated ship's holds and ice houses at the destination. Over time, he improved his methods until he could deliver ice to places like Martinique, Cuba and New Orleans, still frozen and glistening, even under the tropical sun. In the beginning, Tudor lost a fortune as much of his ice melted away, but he learned from each attempt. He built better insulated ice houses at his destinations to store the cargo, and he lined his ships with sawdust and timber for insulation, cutting ice wastage dramatically, from nearly 2/3 melting down to only around 8% loss by the time the ice reached port. As his methods improved, demand grew. Others joined the business. In 1825, one of Tudor's collaborators invented a horse-drawn ice plough that could score ice faster and more safely than hand labour. Harvesting ice became quicker and cheaper, and an industry was born. Before long, he could routinely deliver ice to tropical ports still solid and ready to use. Sailors and dock workers who handled the ice cargo in those far-off ports often could scarcely believe it. Touching solid ice under a sweltering sun was like holding a piece of winter in their hands. During the 1830s and 1840s, the ice trade expanded further, with shipments reaching England, India, South America, China and Australia. Tudor made a fortune from the India trade, and Wenham Lake ice from New England became famous in London, where it was marketed as a high-quality luxury product for upscale customers. People in Havana or New Orleans marvelled at the novelty of a cool drink in the heat, thanks to ice shipped from thousands of miles away. By the 1830s and 1840s, the ice trade had indeed gone global. In London, imported ice from America, branded as Wenham ice after a Massachusetts lake, became a fad among high society. Back in the United States, ice became increasingly entwined with daily life. As cities like New York and Philadelphia grew in the mid-19th century, demand for ice in the summer soared. It wasn't just a luxury for the rich. Middle-class people started using ice to preserve food and chill drinks. Ice boxes, essentially insulated cabinets to hold a block of ice, became a common feature in homes. Many homes displayed a small card in the window indicating how many pounds of ice they wanted, so the iceman knew whether to bring a big block or just a small piece. Inside the house, the kitchen door stands open, waiting for the delivery. Imagine a sweltering city morning around the year 1900. The sun has just risen, but the heat is already radiating off brick walls. Down the street comes a horse-drawn wagon, and on its side a big block-lettered sign reads "Ice." The iceman, wearing suspenders and a flat cap, stands on the wagon bed amidst huge blocks of crystal-clear ice packed in straw. He hefts a dripping block with iron tongs, rests it on a burlap pad on his shoulder, and trudges toward a customer's house. Children playing on the sidewalk pause and run over, begging him for slivers of ice. With a good-natured grin, he chips off a couple of small shards for them. They giggle as they press the cool chips to their tongues, a brief sweet relief in the summer heat. Inside the house, the iceman enters the kitchen carrying the heavy block on his shoulder. In the corner sits the family's oak icebox, a sturdy cabinet with a metal-lined interior. The iceman swings open the top compartment and drops the new block in, sliding it into place next to the remnants of yesterday's ice. A puff of frosty air wafts out, momentarily cooling the room. Meltwater from the old ice block trickles down a pipe to a pan that the homemaker emptied earlier that morning. As the new ice thumps into place, droplets splash onto the floor. The iceman tips his cap and departs as quietly as he came, off to the next house. For the family, this routine is as ordinary as the sunrise. The housewife closes the icebox lid and wipes her hands. Inside, the fresh block will keep their milk, butter and leftovers cool for a couple more days. She arranges a jar of pickles and a bowl of yesterday's stew back inside on the shelves. The interior smells faintly of cold, damp wood and food, a comforting scent on a hot day. In a little while, perhaps she'll fetch a pitcher of lemonade from that icebox, and thanks to the iceman's delivery, it will be nicely chilled. This was life in the age of ice, a dance with nature's frozen gifts, repeated over and over, day by day, every summer. The ice trade grew into a vast industry. At its peak near the end of the 19th century, millions of tons of natural ice were being harvested and sold each year. At its peak, at the end of the 19th century, the US ice trade employed an estimated 90,000 people and was capitalized at $28 million, around $660 million in today's terms. Ice cut from the lakes of New England was stored in huge ice warehouses, sometimes capable of holding tens of thousands of tons at once. Train cars packed with ice carried fresh meat from the slaughterhouses of Chicago to distant cities without it spoiling. Networks of ice wagons distributed the product to customers in cities. Fishermen packed their catch in crushed ice, allowing them to voyage farther and bring back more fish without spoilage. Brewers, who once had to stop making certain beers in the summer, could ferment lager beer year-round by cooling their fermentation cellars with ice. Entire new businesses sprang up around what was called the cold chain, a network of ice-cooled warehouses, railcars and ships that kept food fresh over long distances. Chilled refrigerator cars and ships created a national industry in vegetables and fruit that could previously only have been consumed locally. US and British fishermen began to preserve their catches in ice, allowing longer voyages and bigger hauls, and the brewing industry became operational all year round. This early cold chain slowly changed what people could eat and where they could live. Perishable food could travel farther. A person in St. Louis or New York in the 1870s might taste fresh oranges from Florida or fish from the Atlantic, brought in on ice. Meat from the ranches of Texas could be slaughtered, chilled, and shipped to markets hundreds of miles away. Instead of having to drive live cattle on the hoof for weeks, the availability of ice and refrigeration meant cities could be larger and less dependent on nearby farms for every fresh thing. People had more variety in their diet and a little more confidence that food would keep longer. Yet, even as the ice industry boomed, inventors were quietly preparing its obsolescence. The final decades of the 19th century saw mechanical refrigeration leap from experimental to industrial. The first practical vapour compression refrigeration system was built by James Harrison, a Scotsman who had emigrated to Australia. His 1856 patent was for a vapour compression system using ether, alcohol, or ammonia. He built a mechanical ice-making machine in 1851 on the banks of the Barwon River at Rocky Point in Geelong, Victoria, and his first commercial ice-making machine followed in 1854. Harrison also introduced commercial vapour compression refrigeration to breweries and meatpacking houses, and by 1861, a dozen of his systems were in operation. Harrison's machine was powered by a steam engine and used ether as the refrigerant. People marvelled to see it turn water into ice even on a warm day by the river. Before long, Australian breweries using his systems found they could brew consistently even in summer, and meatpackers could freeze their beef for export rather than salting it. Around the same time in France, engineer Ferdinand Carré developed another kind of refrigeration machine, using ammonia and water in an absorption process. His compact ice makers were easier to operate and started to find use in places where ice was hard to come by. During the American Civil War in the 1860s, when northern ice shipments to the south were cut off, cities like New Orleans turned to Carré's machines to make ice locally. It was a taste of independence from the northern ice trade. In 1867, in San Antonio, Texas, a French immigrant named Andrew Mule built an ice-making machine to help service the expanding beef industry, and by 1873 his system was producing commercial ice in the US. In Germany, Carl von Linde, a scientist and engineer, was working to satisfy the enormous thirst for cold beer. German breweries needed a steady cold temperature to brew lager, and natural ice storage was not enough for year-round production. In the 1870s, Linde designed an improved ammonia-based refrigeration system that was efficient and reliable. By 1876, he patented this technology, creating the first reliable and efficient compressed ammonia refrigerator. His new process made it possible to use gases such as ammonia, sulfur dioxide, and methyl chloride as refrigerants. These were widely used despite their hazards until safer chemicals came along in the 20th century. Soon, breweries from Munich to Chicago were installing Linde's refrigeration units, and the clink of beer glasses in summer no longer depended on winter ice. Lager beer could ferment in chilled cellars even in July. The era of industrial refrigeration had truly begun. The impact was global. In the 1870s and 1880s, entrepreneurs seized on the new refrigeration machines to transform agriculture and trade. One famous breakthrough came from the Southern Hemisphere, a land rich in sheep and cattle but far from the world's markets. In 1882, the first successful shipment of frozen meat from New Zealand reached England aboard the ship Dunedin. This was headline news. A shipload of meat had travelled through the tropics without spoiling, thanks to a refrigeration unit in its hold. Suddenly, distance was not a barrier to fresh meat. New Zealand and Australia could raise lamb and beef and sell it to Europe. Shortly after, Argentina and Uruguay, with their vast pampas, also began exporting frozen beef to Europe. People in London could enjoy a roast from New Zealand, and people in Paris could dine on Argentine beef. When the Dunedin's cargo was put up for sale at London's Smithfield Market, wary butchers examined the meat and found it in superb condition. They could scarcely believe that such quality lamb had come from a world away. This success was heralded as a miracle of the age, and it opened the door for New Zealand and Australia to become leading exporters of meat. Over the next few years, dozens of refrigerated ships, often called reefers, carried mutton, beef, butter, and more across the oceans. This Kiwi miracle showed that an entire country's agricultural abundance could reach the global market. By the end of the 19th century, refrigeration had quietly become essential to modern industry. In America and Europe, even though most homes still had only iceboxes, the behind-the-scenes logistics of food were increasingly refrigerated. Warehouses in port cities had cold rooms powered by steam engines or early electric motors driving ammonia compressors. Trains carried produce in chilled cars cooled by ice or brine. The average consumer might not have known all the technology involved. They just knew that more often the food they bought in markets was fresh and available even out of season. The stage was set for the refrigerator to enter the home, but it wouldn't happen overnight. At the turn of the 20th century, if you walked into a typical kitchen, you would still find the trusty icebox. Perhaps there'd be a delivery of ice in the morning, the iceman placing a 50-pound block into the box and taking the melted remnants of the last block away. A diligent homemaker would wipe up the water and arrange the week's perishables around the new ice block. Milk, butter, maybe some meat or fish bought that day, all to be consumed soon. An icebox could keep things cool for a short while, but not nearly as cold or as long as a modern fridge. Still, it was better than nothing. People planned meals and shopping around the cycle of ice delivery and the limits of the icebox. Electricity was spreading in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and inventors dreamed of harnessing it to create automatic refrigeration for the home. In 1913, an American named Fred W. Wolfe Jr. devised one of the first electric household refrigerators. His invention, called the Domel, short for domestic electric refrigerator, was a unit that could be installed on top of an existing icebox. It had a small motor and compressor that would circulate a refrigerant to cool the box, essentially replacing the block of ice with a mechanical cold maker. Wolfe's early refrigerator was quite an upgrade. It saved people from hauling ice and worrying about constant melting. But it was also a complicated contraption by today's standards, with the machinery often noisy and placed on top of the box, or in the basement to keep the heat and sound away from the kitchen. Only a few thousand of these were produced in the 19-teens, but it was a sign of things to come. In 1914, engineer Nathaniel Wales introduced an idea for a practical electric refrigeration unit, which became the basis for the Kelvinator brand. A self-contained refrigerator with a compressor at the bottom of the cabinet was invented by Alfred Mellows in 1916. Mellows produced this refrigerator commercially, but was bought out by William C. Durant in 1918, who started the Frigidaire company to mass-produce refrigerators. In 1918, the Kelvinator company introduced the first refrigerator with any type of automatic control. Mass production of domestic refrigerators began in earnest after World War I. Throughout the 1920s, multiple companies and inventors improved on the designs. One challenge was finding a safe refrigerant. The fluids that worked well in those first refrigeration cycles were often dangerous. Toxic ammonia, sulfur dioxide, or flammable methyl chloride. Nobody wanted a poisonous or explosive gas leaking in their kitchen. Engineers tried to seal the systems tightly, but accidents and leaks did happen, and the fear of these chemicals slowed adoption in homes. It was one thing to have ammonia pipes in a brewery, but in a family kitchen it was another matter. A breakthrough came in the late 1920s with the development of a new class of refrigerants called chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, marketed under the name Freon. Freon was non-toxic and non-flammable, a seemingly miraculous solution. First introduced around 1930, it quickly became the standard for refrigerators in the 1930s. Now, home fridges could be made safer and more convenient. The timing of this was interesting. It coincided with the Great Depression, a time when luxuries were hard for many to afford. Yet even during those tough years, the appeal of the refrigerator was strong. In 1927, General Electric introduced a model that would become the first widely popular refrigerator, the monitor-top refrigerator, named because its round compressor unit on top resembled the turret of the Civil War iron-clad ship USS Monitor. The monitor-top was a game-changer. It was reasonably reliable, ran on electricity, and for the first time a refrigerator didn't need any separate plumbing or complex installation beyond plugging it in. Over 1 million monitor-top fridges were sold in the late 1920s and early 1930s. The unit quickly gained the name monitor-top because the top-mounted compressor resembled the gun turret on the old ironclad ship. Still, these early refrigerators were not cheap, around $525 at the time, equivalent to several $1,000s today. But mass production and the expanding electrical grid meant more and more households began to save up for one. Owners were enchanted by the idea of not dealing with messy ice deliveries and having truly cold storage that could even freeze ice cubes. An owner of a new electric refrigerator no longer had to constantly mop up water from a drip pan. Vegetables and meat lasted longer, and milk stayed safely cold overnight without turning sour. It must have felt almost like having a bit of winter on demand just by hearing that hum in the kitchen. As the 1930s progressed, refrigerators slowly shifted from luxury to necessity in many American homes. Only about 1 in 10 US households had a mechanical refrigerator around 1930, but by 1940 almost half of American homes did. Even during the hardships of the Depression, many families prioritised saving for a fridge because it made life so much easier. By the early 1950s, refrigerators were becoming standard. Around 80% of American households had one by 1955. In Britain, adoption was a bit slower. As late as 1959, only about 13% of households in the UK owned a refrigerator, but by 1970 more than half did. After that, the march toward near-universal refrigerator ownership in the developed world was inexorable. Today, practically every home in industrialised countries has at least one refrigerator. In the United States, it is over 99% of households, and in many developing regions, the refrigerator is one of the first appliances families acquire, as electricity becomes reliable. After all, the refrigerator instantly cuts food spoilage, improves nutrition, and frees families from the drudgery of daily marketing and cooking, granting them more flexibility and peace of mind. In rural communities, the spread of electric lines in the 1930s and 40s meant farm families could finally enjoy refrigerators too. Often, after a farm was connected to power, one of the first investments was an electric refrigerator, a symbol of modern comfort that spared them from the daily chore of cooling milk with well water or salting meat for preservation. At first, owning a refrigerator was a status symbol, a shiny marvel that neighbours might come over to admire, but within a few decades it became an expected feature of any modern home. People could barely imagine living without one. What did this mean for everyday life? The changes came gradually, subtly improving things year by year. Think of a family in 1920 versus a family in 1950. In 1920, perhaps they shopped daily or every couple of days, buying what they needed to eat immediately because their icebox could not keep things cold for long. The mother, as it often fell to women then, might have had to spend a good part of each day planning meals around what was fresh or what needed to be used before spoiling. There was a lot of pickling, smoking and canning going on, age-old methods to extend food's usability. But by 1950, with a refrigerator humming away in the kitchen, that same family could do a week's worth of grocery shopping and store it. The milk would keep for many days, the meat for the whole week if needed. Leftovers from a big Sunday dinner could be safely kept and enjoyed on Tuesday. A head of lettuce that once would wilt by the next day could now stay crisp for over a week, the cold air keeping its leaves fresh and green. Leftover chicken from Monday could be turned into a salad on Wednesday without worry, a small miracle that made the most of every meal. The concept of saving leftovers for later truly became practical only once refrigerators were around to keep them safe. Even restaurants began offering to wrap up unfinished food for patrons to take home, the doggy bag, something that only made sense once a fridge at home could keep those leftovers fresh for the next day. This changed the rhythm of food and meal planning. It gave people more free time and flexibility. Trips to the market could be fewer, allowing time for other activities or work. The phrase, "let's save it for later," gained real meaning when you could actually save food for later without it ruining. The refrigerator changed social roles too in subtle ways. In many cultures, the daily trip to the market was not just about food, but a social routine. Chatting with vendors, buying only what was needed for the day's meals. With a home fridge, the pattern shifted to a weekly supermarket visit. Instead of walking to the market each dawn to see what was fresh, people could shop weekly, pushing a cart through aisles of a new kind of store, the supermarket, which itself only existed because it could store all those perishable goods under refrigeration. The cadence of life became less tied to immediate food needs and more open to personal schedules, a subtle shift in freedom. One could argue something was lost there socially, but something was also gained: convenience and the ability to stock up. In American suburbia, the rise of the big supermarket in the 1950s and 60s went hand in hand with the refrigerator and also the car. You could drive to a large store, buy a cart full of perishables, and know that at home your fridge and freezer could keep them safe for days or weeks. Refrigerators also quietly improved health. Foodborne illnesses from spoiled food became less common, as people were able to keep food at safer temperatures. Milk, which could easily harbour dangerous bacteria if it sat too long at room temperature, was now kept cold from the farm to the fridge, drastically reducing sour milk and the risk of sickness. Doctors and public health officials noted fewer instances of foodborne illnesses like milk-borne tuberculosis or meat-related infections as cold storage became common. Families were less likely to consume spoiled food, and children grew up healthier and stronger with a steadier supply of fresh milk, fruits and vegetables year-round. The ability to keep leftovers chilled meant less waste and better nutrition. Families could cook in bulk and save food for another day, ensuring more consistent meals. And with refrigeration, foods rich in vitamins, fruits, vegetables, dairy, meats, could be available year-round, improving diets. During the era before refrigeration, winters and early spring often meant vitamin deficiencies when fresh produce was scarce. That became much rarer in the age of refrigeration, as cold storage and transport brought apples in April and green vegetables in December to many dinner tables. The coming of the freezer was another quiet revolution. In the 1940s and 50s, separate freezer compartments, or even standalone chest freezers, became available to homeowners. Suddenly, the horizon of food storage extended from days to months. A family could freeze summer's bounty and savour it in winter. Peas, corn and berries picked at their peak and tucked away at -18 degrees Celsius, to be brought out long after the garden had faded. The term deep freeze entered the vocabulary, promising a kind of time capsule for food. Homemakers learned that they could bake large batches of meals and freeze portions for later, saving effort on busy days. Ice cream, once something you bought occasionally or made only with effort, could be kept at home in a carton, ready whenever a child's sweet tooth struck. Popsicles and ice lollies became staples of childhood summers, retrieved from the home freezer rather than from the ice cream cart on the street. With freezers, people gained not just convenience but a new dimension of food security, a buffer of frozen provisions that could tide a family through lean times or unexpected guests. It was yet another layer of peace of mind, the ability to pause time for food, holding it in a wintry suspension until needed. On a larger scale, refrigeration changed the world's food supply chains. It allowed for the modern supermarket and the globalization of food. Bananas from Central America could be shipped in refrigerated ships to Europe and North America, turning them from an exotic rarity into an everyday snack. In the 19th century, a banana was a near-mythical fruit in London or New York. By the mid-20th century, children ate them routinely, largely because of refrigerated transportation and storage. To give one example, by the mid-20th century, a schoolchild in chilly England could peel a bright yellow banana in January, a fruit grown thousands of miles away in the tropics, and find it fresh and sweet. Such a thing would have been nearly impossible before refrigerated ships and storage. The humble banana, once a rare luxury, became an everyday treat thanks to the cold chain that kept it at just the right temperature from plantation to lunchbox. Similarly, fish caught in the Pacific could reach inland cities fresh, and cheese made in Wisconsin could be sold in Texas. The distances that food could travel grew immensely with each improvement in refrigeration technology. First ice-cooled rail cars, then mechanically cooled trucks and ships. Ocean-spanning ships and railroads with cooling made it routine for someone in a landlocked city to enjoy seafood that was swimming in the ocean just days before. The reach of fishermen and farmers extended to the appetites of people thousands of miles away. This had some profound economic effects. Regions that were once isolated or limited by climate suddenly found new opportunities. A farmer in a hot country could grow green beans or peppers that would be packed in a refrigerated truck and sent to a cooler climate market. Dairy farms in one state could ship milk far beyond their local area as long as it was kept chilled. The cold chain, the network of refrigerated storage and transport, became critical infrastructure, as important as roads and rail lines for feeding cities. Huge refrigerated warehouse ships and container vessels crisscrossed the oceans, laden with fruits, meat and other perishables. They maintain precise cold temperatures so that, for example, grapes from South America can arrive fresh in Europe, or fish caught in the Pacific can be savoured in kitchens half a world away. What was once local and seasonal is now global and year-round, largely thanks to these unseen cold guardians of the food supply, and indeed, it enabled cities to grow larger and in more extreme climates than ever before. Consider how refrigeration even influenced politics and population movements. After World War II, for example, the growth of the Sunbelt cities in the United States, like Houston, Texas, or Las Vegas, Nevada, was made possible not just by air conditioning making the climate livable, but also by refrigerated transport ensuring a stable food supply. Before reliable refrigeration and transport, it would have been impractical to support millions of people in such environments where local agriculture couldn't meet the demand. With cooling technology, however, food could travel to the people, rather than people always needing to live near the food. Places like Phoenix or Las Vegas, where summer temperatures are blistering and local agriculture is limited, could not support huge populations without food shipped in daily under cool conditions. Thanks to refrigeration, supermarkets in those cities are filled with fresh produce, dairy, and meat year-round, all brought in from far away and kept in carefully chilled environments. Modern cities became dependent on refrigeration as much as on running water or electricity. It's part of the invisible backbone that keeps society running. Agriculture itself transformed. Refrigeration meant that produce could be picked at peak ripeness and shipped to market before it rotted. It reduced waste significantly. It also helped consolidate agriculture. Large farms could serve whole countries, outcompeting many small local farms. A smaller number of farms could feed more people, as long as they had the refrigeration logistics to distribute their products. Farmers could send their harvest to distant markets without fear of spoilage, which meant they could specialise in crops best suited to their land and climate, knowing refrigeration would carry their goods far and wide. Over time, many smaller farms consolidated into larger operations that could supply entire regions or nations, relying on cold storage to smooth out the bumps of seasonal production. A larger concentration of food production coming from a smaller percentage of farms became possible. Cold storage also allowed governments and businesses to smooth out the supply of seasonal items. Apples picked in the fall could be kept in chilled warehouses and sold months later, without spoiling, preventing gluts and shortages. Refrigeration didn't just touch food. The medical field also benefited immensely. Vaccines, for instance, often require constant refrigeration from the factory to the point of use. The cold chain for vaccines is crucial for immunisation programs around the world. Blood banks and organ transplants rely on refrigeration to preserve blood and tissues. Insulin and many other medications need to be kept cold. In this way, refrigerators and coolers have saved lives by enabling modern medicine to reach far and wide. That little vaccine vial in a remote clinic in Africa is potent because a series of refrigerators kept it at the right temperature all along its journey. This cooling technology has also quietly saved lives. Think of a vaccine vial that must be kept chilled from a high-tech laboratory all the way to a remote village clinic. Refrigeration makes that possible every step of the journey, from the moment it leaves the factory in a refrigerated truck, to the airplane in a temperature-controlled container, to a generator-powered fridge in a rural health outpost. In that distant clinic, a nurse opens a small refrigerator and takes out the vaccine, confident that it's potent and safe because it's been kept cold. A child receives an immunization that day that protects them from a deadly disease, all because the cold chain carried medicine intact across continents. The people benefiting may never think about the complex web of cooling behind it. To them, it is simply a shot in the arm. But it's another profound way refrigeration underpins the modern world, by preserving not just our food, but our health. Another area changed by refrigeration is entertainment and leisure through foods. Think of ice cream, once a handmade treat enjoyed rarely. Now, thanks to the freezer, it became a common pleasure. In the early 1800s, ice cream was something you could only get if winter ice was available, or if you were at a fancy party with an ice house. By the mid-20th century, families could simply buy it from a store and keep it at home. Cold beverages too became part of culture. Soft drinks, chilled beer, iced tea, all became expected to be served cold. People grew so accustomed to chilled beverages that in some countries it became unthinkable to drink water or soda at room temperature. The clink of ice cubes in a glass became a hallmark of hospitality on a hot day. Cocktails, colas and iced tea all owed some of their popularity to the simple availability of ice anytime we want. Before refrigerators, people had to brew beer in certain seasons and drank it at cellar temperatures. Once fridges and ice were everywhere, tastes shifted to crisper, colder drinks, changing industries like brewing and winemaking. A whole culture of frosty refreshments was born. from summertime lemonade to the ubiquitous soda fountains, none of which would be the same without reliable ice on demand. Through the later decades of the 20th century, refrigerators continued to improve, but their fundamental role stayed the same. They got bigger, more affordable, and more efficient. The 1950s and 1960s saw technical advances like automatic defrosting and automatic ice makers. More efficient refrigerators were developed in the 1970s and 1980s, even though environmental issues led to the banning of very effective Freon refrigerants. Early models had small freezer compartments mainly for ice trays, but by the late 1940s separate freezers became common for home use, and by the 1950s many households had what we'd recognise as the modern refrigerator-freezer combination. Designers also played with style. The majority of fridges were white in the early 1950s, but by the late 50s and 60s colourful appliances, pastel pinks, turquoises, avocado green, were in vogue. Today many have reverted to sleek white, black or stainless steel. These cosmetic changes aside, the core mechanics of a fridge have remained much the same since mid-century. In recent times, concerns about the environment have also touched the refrigerator. The CFC refrigerants like Freon that once seemed perfect were discovered in the 1980s to be causing damage to the ozone layer, the shield in the upper atmosphere that protects Earth from harmful UV radiation. It turned out that when old fridges leaked or were discarded, the CFC gases would eventually reach the stratosphere and break down ozone, contributing to the famous ozone hole. The world took notice, and through international agreements, like the Montreal Protocol, CFCs were phased out starting in the 1990s. New refrigerators were designed to use different gases that would not harm the ozone. It was a quiet change. Most consumers might not have even realised it. But by 1994 in the United States, CFCs like Freon 12 were banned for use in new fridges and air conditioning systems. Manufacturers switched to alternatives like R134A, and later to even newer blends as some of those were found to contribute to global warming. There is a poetic justice in how humanity handled this issue. The very technology that helped us so much had inadvertently harmed the sky, but nations came together to fix it. New refrigerants were developed, and the ozone layer began to recover. It was a quiet triumph of global cooperation, all to ensure that the soothing cold of our refrigerators would no longer carry a hidden cost. Energy efficiency also became a focus. Early refrigerators gobbled a lot of electricity. Over time, engineering improvements made compressors and insulation better. A fridge from the 1970s might use several times more energy than a modern one. With millions upon millions of fridges in the world, these efficiency gains matter. In fact, refrigeration, continually operated, typically consumes a significant portion of household electricity in many places. In a typical large grocery store, for instance, the refrigerators and freezers can consume up to half of the entire store's electricity. This is why modern designs, like adding glass doors to open freezer aisles, have been adopted, to save energy while still keeping food cold. Retailers found that even closing the glass doors on supermarket display cases saved a lot of energy and kept food just as well, rather than having open cooler aisles. Small innovations accumulated over years have made today's refrigerators quieter, more efficient, and more reliable than those of decades past. It's not uncommon now for a refrigerator to run for many years with minimal maintenance. A far cry from the early days when owners had to occasionally service the coolant or deal with mechanical quirks. Modern domestic refrigerators are extremely reliable because the motor and compressor are integrated within a sealed unit, with greatly reduced likelihood of leakage or contamination. By comparison, earlier generation compressors sometimes required recharging or repairs. Looking ahead, the refrigerator's story continues. Today's models are far more efficient than those of decades past, using a fraction of the electricity to do the same job. Researchers and engineers are constantly exploring new cooling technologies, from super-insulating materials to refrigerators that can run on solar power in remote areas. There are even smart fridges now that can remind you to buy milk or adjust their temperature automatically. Yet, for all the new bells and whistles, the heart of the refrigerator remains unchanged. It's still that trusted box of cold, faithfully preserving our provisions. The form may evolve with sleeker designs or greener refrigerants, but the function, keeping our food fresh and safe, is a timeless need it will continue to fulfill. Even as we innovate, we are unlikely to give up the simple assurance we get from opening the fridge and finding its cool embrace, protecting the things we need. And consider how the refrigerator has insinuated itself beyond just food. The door often becomes a gallery of everyday life, adorned with family photos, children's drawings, grocery lists, and magnets from vacations. It stands not only as an appliance, but as a bulletin board of the home, quietly witnessing daily routines as it hums along. This too is a subtle sign of how central the fridge is in the household. It's not just preserving food, but also holding memories and reminders on its sturdy door. Indeed, many people who grew up before refrigerators would never forget the day they got their first electric fridge. It often stands out in memory like a special occasion. They recall cleaning out the old icebox for the last time and marvelling at how the new refrigerator didn't need any ice delivery. Some speak of being initially sceptical. Could this humming box really keep things cold all the time? And then being amazed when the milk stayed fresh and the butter firm without daily attention. One grandmother, interviewed in the 1980s, laughed as she remembered opening and closing the fridge door repeatedly, just to feel the chill and assure herself it was real. For her, it was as though a little bit of everyday worry simply evaporated once the fridge was there. She recalled how her mother used to fret about keeping meats safe in summer, how every meal plan revolved around what might spoil. The refrigerator changed all that quietly. Experiences like hers were repeated in millions of households, as the trusty new appliance quietly earned its place in the family and in the kitchen. It's remarkable that such a world-changing device became a mundane part of life. We open the refrigerator countless times without thinking much of it. Yet every time we do, we benefit from what it provides. It gives us cold milk for our cereal on warm summer mornings. It keeps our butter firm yet spreadable. It chills a melon so it's perfectly refreshing when sliced. It guards last night's dinner so that we can safely enjoy the leftovers the next day. It offers a freezer full of possibilities, a scoop of ice cream on a whim, or ice cubes for an evening drink. All these small comforts and conveniences add up to a profound improvement in quality of life, and they arrive so gradually that people barely noticed the revolution at first. The refrigerator became an ordinary appliance, but the reliability of ordinary things can be extraordinary in how much they shape our days. To put it in perspective, the era of widespread refrigeration is still very young in the grand sweep of history. For thousands upon thousands of years, humans got by without this luxury, employing laborious workarounds to keep food edible. Then, over just a few generations in the 19th and 20th centuries, the refrigerator went from non-existence to near ubiquity. By the year 2000, even in places that had never seen ice in nature, there were refrigerators humming away. It is astonishing how swiftly and smoothly this change took hold. One could live through the transition and hardly notice the historical significance. A child born in 1900 might have seen their family go from an icebox cooled by lake ice to a self-defrosting electric refrigerator by mid-century. In the timeline of human civilization, it was like flipping a switch. One moment the world was limited by the old constraints of preservation, and the next moment those constraints began to melt away, just as silently as an ice cube melting in a glass. As you prepare to drift to sleep, consider the journey of cold, from the distant ice houses of ancient Persia to the humming fridge nearby. It is a story of patience, ingenuity, and gradual transformation. By mastering cold, we learn to steal a bit of time, to delay the inevitable spoiling of food and make the moment last longer. Like ice forming layer by layer on a winter pond, the benefits of refrigeration accumulated over time until our lives were blanketed by its comfort. The world changed slowly because of refrigerators. It changed in how we eat, how we farm, how we trade, and even where we live. But it didn't change with fanfare or sudden drama. It changed with a cool, steady progress, much like the slow cycling of a refrigerator's compressor turning on and off through the night. It is no exaggeration to say the refrigerator has become nearly invisible in its ubiquity, noticed only when absent, yet essential all the same. Generations grew up healthier and taller because they had access to better nutrition from refrigerated food. Communities grew into cities in places where food could only come from far away. And our daily habits shifted to a new rhythm that made time for other things beyond daily food worries. It's often said that we really notice our appliances only when they stop working. The refrigerator is a prime example. Think of a time when the electricity fails on a hot summer day. All at once the house falls silent, the fridge's hum ceases. In that quiet, a small worry sets in. How long will the food inside stay cold? The household might become frugal with opening the refrigerator door, trying to trap the remaining chill inside. Hours creep by, and people start considering which foods to cook soon before they spoil. It's a subtle anxiety that our great-grandparents would have known well from the icebox days. When finally the power returns and the refrigerator stirs back to life with a reassuring buzz, there's a collective sigh of relief. The modern household has avoided a brush with the old fears of spoilage. In those moments, we realise how seamlessly the refrigerator shields us from uncertainty, and how its quiet diligence is missed the moment it's gone. Now, late at night, when all is still, we might notice that gentle hum in the kitchen. The refrigerator hums consistently, a white noise of modern life. Every so often, you might hear it click off, and then, a bit later, click back on again, the compressor resting, then working, in a slow, steady rhythm. It's almost like the gentle breathing of the house at night, in out, quietly keeping everything safe and cool. The leftovers from the day's dinner are safely tucked away on its shelves. A pitcher of cool water stands ready for any midnight thirst. With the kitchen lights off, the faint glow inside the fridge is like a tiny hearth, keeping nourishment secure until morning. It is a story of patience, ingenuity, and gradual transformation. In the grand tapestry of history, the refrigerator's story is not one of sudden conquest, but of gentle, persistent influence. It crept into our homes and habits softly, like frost forming overnight. By the time most people realised its significance, it had already reshaped their world. It's a story of patience, ingenuity, and gradual transformation. But one more thing as well. Many of the old food preservation arts, salting, smoking, pickling, jam making, became less about necessity and more about choice or tradition. People still did them for taste or as hobbies, but day-to-day survival no longer depended on knowing how to cure meat for the winter or can vegetables before they spoiled, because the refrigerator quietly handled that job. It is no exaggeration to say the refrigerator has become a silent partner in our lives. Truly, it's hard to conceive of modern life without the refrigerator quietly doing its duty each day. By mastering cold, humanity learned to steal a bit of time, to preserve perishable moments and make them last, and by doing so, we gained new freedom and security in how we live. So the next time you get a glass of cold water in the middle of the night, or enjoy fresh berries out of season, remember that quiet hum and what it represents. In that humble appliance is the legacy of centuries of invention and the gentle revolutions of everyday life. The refrigerator doesn't demand our attention. It just does its job day in and day out, preserving a bit of the chill of night for the warmth of the day. And in its quiet way, it has changed the world, slowly, surely, and completely, while most of us were busy with other things, or perhaps simply sleeping through the night. Its gentle background tone is almost like a household lullaby, assuring you in the silence of the night that your food is safe and tomorrow's breakfast will be waiting for you, cool and fresh. It is the soft sound of comfort and continuity in our lives. So rest easy. As you sleep, the refrigerator will be there, humming softly through the night, keeping life's necessities fresh for a new day.